Only the three Zoavs had weathered the razor blade storm. Wave after wave of metal filaments had bombarded Macken's phalanx, the tiny threads shredding flesh and bone, but only scratching the solid steam blood carapaces. The attack left them standing over the mangled wreckage of their comrades like knights in an abattoir. Incredibly, a few of the butchered carcasses were still alive, moaning and wailing as they bled out from 1,000 cuts. "Both of you stand absolutely still," Macken whispered over the Vox. "I don't understand," Wade voxed back. "Quietly," Macken hissed. "We're sealed up tight, but let's not play with fire. Now just do as I say unless you want to die." "By your command," Wade whispered formally. "Prentice," Macken said. "Prentice, did you get that?" There was no reply from the third Zoav, but Macken couldn't risk checking on him. He had to ignore the wounded too. They were probably beyond help, but that didn't make it any easier. "Sir, what in the hell's just happened to us?" Wade's voice sounded strained, and Macken guessed some of the filaments had got through his armor, probably slipping in at the joints. "Loxatl," Macken said bleakly. The moment the attack had come, he'd recognized the weapon and realized the folly of bunching his men up. "What are those lizard trash doing here?" Wade hissed incredulously. "What they're always doing. Killing for pay." Greetings friends and welcome to the Liber Xenologis. I'm Lorcan and this is OnlyWar. As humanity has spread across the galaxy, first during the dark age of technology, and then in the days of the Emperor's Great Crusade through to the sprawling current Imperium of mankind, we have discovered a myriad of xenos species. The massive differences in evolutionary pressures encountered across the galaxy, the influence of the warp, and the genetic manipulation of beings in ancient history and more recent times, looking at you, Fabius, have given birth to an almost unimaginable diversity of known life forms. With such wide-ranging xenos biodiversity, it is maybe not surprising that amongst the outlandish and almost incomprehensible species that have arisen to dominate their home planets, and in some cases whole systems, there are also some that bear striking similarities to species from our own evolutionary past, back when Holy Terror was still a biosphere capable of supporting natural ecosystems. One such creature is the Loxatl, and in today's entry in the Liber Xenologis we will discuss this distinctly familiar reptilian xenos species. As always, we will look at their unique physiology, discuss some of the various and invariably hostile interactions between the Loxatl and the Imperium of Man, and then delve into some of the mysteries of their technology and origins, including some speculation on past links to the Tau. Before we go further, a huge thanks to the supporters on Patreon whose contributions help keep this small channel building towards the future. Links to the Patreon and other ways you can support OnlyWar, such as using my affiliate links for discounted hobby purchases, are in the description. Thank you for joining us, and if you're new here, I hope I earn your subscription today. The Loxatl are a quadruped species of xenos that are normally larger than a man, sometimes approaching 10 feet in length. They appear to have evolved from a species bearing similarities to monitor lizards of ancient terror. Their classification by imperial scholars as Varanus dracones relates to the Varanus genus that these lizards belong to. They run close to the ground on 4 crooked limbs ending in wickedly hooked claws. These, combined with extended dew claws, allow the Loxatl to climb all but the smoothest of surfaces, and they are fully capable of scrambling across both walls and indeed ceilings in order to strike at their unsuspecting victims. They have broad heads containing a heavily fanged maw and eyes which have been described as either yellow or red in certain specimens. They have a long purple muscular tongue that they use to taste the air constantly. It is believed that the Loxatl evolved from an aquatic or at least semi-aquatic organism, and as such their eyesight, hearing and olfactory senses are greatly impaired when on land. However, the Loxatl more than make up for these deficiencies with a highly developed sense of taste, assumedly using their tongue to deliver chemicals found in the air to organs similar in function to the Jacobson's organs found in snakes and lizards. Their ability to detect prey and sense the presence of enemies through airborne chemical traces apparently extends over a kilometer, and combined with their dexterous nature makes the Loxatl expert scouts and trackers. It is also speculated that the Loxatl possess some form of rudimentary organic sonar and are able to detect the footsteps and even the distinct heartbeat of their prey over even greater distances than their highly sensitive sense of taste. There are reports of the Loxatl having some form of specialized echolocation gland in order to achieve these feats. The rogue trader Captain Janus Drake claimed to have used a high-frequency tone generator in order to incapacitate a specimen, the Loxatl thrashing about on the ground as the high-frequency sounds disrupted its auditory systems, inducing terrible visions. While Drake was then able to dispatch the creature with ease, when he attempted to repeat this success on a second occasion, the tone generator instead acted like a sonic beacon, attracting a swarm of the creatures to descend on his position, and forcing him to flee for his life in less than glorious fashion. The skin of the Loxatl is covered with fine grey scales which are coated by an excreted protective slime. The Loxatl are able to change their coloration to some degree to camouflage themselves, although their own lack of visual acuity on land means they often do not take full advantage of this adaptation. The Loxatl also use changes in skin coloration to communicate with other members of their race, and to a lesser degree with those members of other species with whom they are lending their predatory skills for payment. Beyond the inability to completely camouflage themselves, the presence of a stalking Loxatl can be given away by a distinctive odour of a chemical secretion the xenos produce when preparing to attack. The scent of this chemical is said to be a combination of sour milk and crushed mint. While this secretion is hypothesized to aid the Loxatl by boosting their swiftness and dexterity to preternatural levels, it may also act as a form of pheromone communication between members of the species. Whatever the purpose of this adaptation, either presently or in their evolutionary past, many a servant of the Imperium has been saved from being taken completely unawares by the distinctive scent signaling an imminent ambush. Often encountered working as mercenaries alongside pirates and renegades, Loxatl tend to operate in small groups of related individuals led by a single matriarch, possibly the only member of the group capable of bearing young. The group communicates with subsonic vibrations, and at close range through iridescent patterning that they are able to flash across their skin. No indications have been found of higher organization than the kin-related brood of 3 to 20 individual Loxatl, but multiple broods will work together en masse with a high degree of cohesion. On occasion, a large number of Loxatl broods have used their unique capabilities to cooperatively infiltrate defenses and stage surprise attacks, typically to open the way for a full-scale assault by their employers, as was the case in the siege of Ubreka, which will be described later in this entry. Las weapons have been reported to be less effective against Loxatl, their hides apparently giving them a rudimentary form of photochromatic defense against lasers. This is at least seen as a fact by some members of the Astra Militarum, as in preparation for conflict where Loxatl may be present, guard squads may be supplied with more solid projectile weapons than usual. An example of this was seen during the Tanith First and Only's assault on Uremberg, when Colonel Commissar Ibram Gaunt procured a number of U-90 assault cannons specifically for use in the action against the Loxatl. All Loxatl encountered have used unique weapons known as flechette blasters to Imperial troops, These are carried along with ammunition bandoliers on mechanical armatures strapped to their sinuous bodies. The flechette blaster is aimed and fired by a mind impulse device wired into the Loxatl's brain, leaving all 4 limbs free for climbing at all times. The blasters fire shotgun-like blasts of millions of monomolecular shards that shred through light armor and leave terrible wounds in flesh. A common Loxatl tactic is for some members of the group to pin down an enemy while the rest clamber into position to catch the foe in a deadly crossfire. The Loxatl slithered from the mist with sly, sinuous movements, crawling with its belly to the ground on 4 clawed legs. It paused and sniffed the air with flaring nostrils, sifting through the scent of carnage for a threat. Watching the beast from the corner of his eye, Macken's finger caressed the trigger of his heavy stubber. The Loxatl aroused an almost primal revulsion in him, its serpentine form somehow embodying the worst aspects of otherness. Its head was a flat, snake-like torpedo that bristled with teeth under the slits of pale, almost sightless eyes. Black saliva drooled from its maw as it flicked its snout back and forth, tasting the air with a questing tongue. Its languid movements were mirrored by the stubby flechette blaster attached to its back. Mounted inside a synapse-linked augmented cradle, the gun responded directly to the creature's thoughts, allowing it to track prey without encumbering its claws. Macken heard the weapon clack and whir as it spun around, lingering on the men who still breathed amongst the pile of bodies. "Sir, one of the bastards has just crawled right into my sights," Wade voxed from somewhere behind him. "Request permission to open fire." "Wait, that's only 2. There's still 1 more out there," Macken said. "Sir, I'm bleeding." "I said wait. We'll only get 1 chance at this." Motionless, Macken kept his eyes on his own Loxatl. He couldn't see the one approaching Wade, or risk looking around for the 3rd, but he sensed it watching and waiting. It was more cautious than its brethren, probably the brood leader, old and canny with the wisdom of countless hunts. Even so, once its packmates started killing the wounded, it wouldn't be able to hold back. Loxatl have been encountered as far apart as the Maelstrom and the Jericho reach, but up until now the location of the Loxatl homeworld remains a mystery to be speculated on, as are any higher aspirations of the race beyond profit and bloodshed. As a race, they seem to have no ships of their own and rely on other xenos for transportation, specifically the Nikasar, Stryzis and Kroot. They have also been reported fighting alongside other xenos mercenaries on the Blackstone Fortress in the Cynossa region of the Ultramar segmentum. All encounters between Loxatl and loyal representatives of the Imperium have been bitterly hostile. To date, the Loxatl have shown no evidence of the mutating or ideological influence of the ruinous powers, but they willingly serve alongside the Chaos God's mortal followers and other enemies of mankind. One such example being in the service of the Blood Pact armies during the Sabbath World's Crusade. At the end of the 16th year of the Sabbath World Crusade, Warmaster Macaroth's incisive advance on the strategically vital Cabal system had overreached itself, leaving the retaken worlds vulnerable to a counter-offensive as many in the Imperial Navy had warned. When it came, it was led by a Chaos warlord known as Orlok Gwor, who had made excellent use of Loxatl mercenaries to take a number of strategically important supply lane planets on the coreward flank of the Crusade's advance. Enothis, Khan 5, Chaos Innate, and Belisiar Binary all fell in quick succession, putting pressure on the fuel supplies of the Crusade fleet. In response, Macaroth would redeploy elements of his spinward flank in an improvised action that would have significant implications for the success of the wider campaign. worlds rich in Promethean or with reserves of solid fuels, planets with vapor mill complexes, and a forge world called Urdesh all became key targets. Colonel Commissar Ibrahim Gaunt would send squads of the Tanith First and Only on a grav-drop assault on the city of Urenberg on the vapor-milling planet of Fantine. The Ghost's mission was to eliminate the Chaos General Sagittar Slaith in advance of the main invasion force. The aim was to demoralize the currently buoyant Blood Pack forces by removing its charismatic leader, well known to be one of Orlok Gore's most trusted lieutenants. Intelligence briefings had informed Gaunt that Slaith's Blood Pact forces were well supported by Loxatl mercenaries, and he equipped his squads with solid projectile assault cannons to combat their resistance to las fire. The Blood Pact themselves were a formidable foe, much more well-disciplined and organized than most of the mortal followers of the ruinous powers. They wore old but well-maintained suits of battle-plated canvas, dyed dark red, drapes of ammo belt and munition pouches secured on black nylon webbing, and crimson steel-bowled helmets with sneering hook-nosed blast visors, chaos insignia glinting on their sleeves and chests. Making great use of their Loxatl allies, the Blood Pact had taken Urenberg swiftly, and although Gaunt's forces would eventually prevail, slaying Slaith and his Loxatl bodyguard with a well-planted bomb, the losses inflicted on the Imperial forces were substantial, despite the tactical acumen of the legendary Commissar. Another engagement account comes from an unnamed guardsman fighting at the siege of Ubreka, and was recorded in the annals of Talon, codicier of the White Scars chapter, who was seconded to the Deathwatch operating in the Jericho Reach. The siege of Ubreka was in its third month when the situation went awry. An outpost line had been set up to stop infiltrators getting up to the forward trenches undetected, but the sentries on the line started to die, unexplained gruesome deaths each night. Come morning, there would be no trace of the bodies of the guardsmen manning the position apart from the grisly, bloody aftermath, signaling their violent demise. Screamers and directional mines covering the lines failed to prevent the guardsmen vanishing night after night. The commissars were requiring more brutal means of persuasion to encourage volunteers for outpost duty, and a whole platoon was lost holding just one stretch of front, before command finally sent specialists from the Order Xenos to investigate. These specialists wasted no time before they set up sniper teams and waited for dark, ordering the guardsmen to fire every flare and activate every illuminator the moment they saw or heard any las fire. Sure enough, just before dawn, the hiss of long las rounds was heard, followed by strange keening cries of alarm and pain. The flares went off, illuminating the insidious Loxatl, their powerful claws and slime-covered hides allowing them to slip right down a ruined pipeway to get into the lines, far beyond where the threat was perceived to be coming from. So rattled by their experiences were the guardsmen that nearly every weapon in the company opened fire on that pipeway. Despite the las rounds' heavy bolter and autocannon fire coming in from all sides, the massed fire of the guardsmen still only accounted for a handful of the enemy. But at least the lines were secured from further infiltration. The skills and weaponry of the Loxatl are less suited to taking on Astartes, with their bio-enhanced physiology and power armor. But this did not prevent the Iron Warrior's warsmith Honsu recruiting the Brood group led by kin leader Zaynant during the annual Skull Harvest hosted by Haroun Blackheart on New Badab, and using them on his assault on Ultramar. In the siege of Gilliman's Gate on Calth, members of Zaynant's kin band accompanied the rogue Raven Guard, Ardaric Vanese, and the Newborn, a mutated clone of Uriel Ventress, captain of the Ultramarines' 4th Company. The Loxatl of Zaynant's kinbad went perfectly still, following his lead and altering their body chemistry to perfectly blend with the mountain stone and reduce their body heat to almost nothing. The reptilian aliens were lethal killers, and with their chameleonic hides, made superlative stealth operatives. It had taken his team of killers 4 hours to climb this far, but Vanez would not be rushed. This was his area of expertise, and though he now questioned why he even fought in Honsu's army, the chance to put his lethal talents into action was too good an opportunity to pass up. Besides, it was the only way they were getting through this gate, and Honsu knew it. He had chosen this approach with great care, climbing through the areas of the gateway where the sensor shadows of the giant statues provided the most cover from augers and anti-personnel guns, placed to stop an enemy doing what he was attempting. "Follow my lead," he said. "Kill anyone you see and do it fast. No survivors and no alarms. Understood?" The newborn nodded, and the Loxatl sent a rippling pattern of violet and gold through their scaled bodies. Vanez had come to recognize that as a scent. 2 rapid slashes of his claws and the luvers were reduced to torn strips of metal. Vanez launched himself through the hole and dropped into the fire control of the mighty guns. The Loxatl swarmed after him, spreading over the walls and ceiling like insects from a kicked burrow. 24 or so operatives filled the fire control center, servitors and defense auxiliary mainly, but a single Ultramarines warrior with a partially augmented torso was plugged into the command console to authorize each firing. Surprised faces turned towards him, and Vanez relished the moment these mortals realized their terrible danger. He launched himself towards the Ultramarine, his claws extended before him. The warrior swung his bolter up, but Vanez slashed it in 2 with a casual flick of his left wrist. His right claw punched through the warrior's neck. Blood spurted around the blades of his gauntlet, and he twisted his arm to tear the wound open further. Gunshots burst around him, and Vanez kicked himself free of the corpse and spun away from the las fire. Streams of flechette shredded the enemy soldiers before they could fire again, and yet more wickering darts ricocheted around the control room as the alien killers rooted out those enemies that had gone to ground. In the counter-assault that would follow from Uriel leading the swords of Calth, the Loxatl would find the splintering fragments of their flechette blasters were no match for Astartes' power armor, while the returning bolter fire negated their resistance to las weaponry. Even their physical adaptations would prove no match for the Astartes in close quarters, as Uriel's squad dispatched the remaining xenos with power sword and bolt pistol, as the claws of the xenos struggled to penetrate the sacred power armor of the Astartes. Even so, the desperate rearguard action of the Loxatl mercenaries achieved its purpose in delaying Uriel, discovering the true purpose of the assault until it was too late. Before we get into more speculative matters relating to the Loxatl, I ask if you've been enjoying this entry so far to hit the like button and give praise to the blessed algorithm. Despite the many hostile encounters between the Loxatl and the Imperium of Man, they are still a race about which there are many unanswered questions. Most notably, where did the Loxatl originate from? And how did a race that appears to have little in the way of technological progress in most areas gain access to the advanced weaponry they wield with such deadly results? Clues to these conundrums can maybe be found in the parable, The Tale of the Proud Man, found in Strangers in the Stars, the translated work of the scribe Titherion. The governor of Arzum was called Caste, and he was a proud man. He had inherited his position and sought always to prove his worthiness for the role. He cleansed the Arzum system of aliens and secured the safety of his people through 5 long, bloody wars. He was determined that his people would never submit to an alien threat. Only one outsider was permitted to enter his halls without censure. The wise sage called Antava came from a people calling themselves the Tau. Over many years, Antava proved himself an invaluable advisor to Governor Castus, aiding him in so many victories that Castus came to see the alien as his brother. One day, as the 2 friends walked near the governor's palace, Antava gave Castus a warning. "You have proved yourself a worthy ruler. The 5 wars have left your people poor, but unlike so many in the galaxy, they can sleep at night without fear of invasion. That is true wealth. Your zeal has served them well, but you must promise me one thing, that you will never seek to defeat the lizards of Propia. Caste was confused. The Loxatl? What do I have to fear from lizards? They are more than simple lizards, replied Antava. They are mighty warriors with powerful weapons on their backs. You have bested every foe you have faced, but on Propia you would meet your doom. The lizards have no interest in you or your subjects, so it would be a mistake to enrage them. Caste could not sleep that night. Antava had never led him wrong before, and he could see the sense in his words, but the idea of a powerful threat, left to fester on the borders of his system, was abhorrent. As the days wore on, the idea became a torment to him, leaving him unable to eat or sleep or think about anything else. Finally, he could bear it no more and ordered his generals to muster his forces and prepare his ships. Antava's pleas fell on deaf ears as Caste set out to war. Antava's warning was proved to be justified. The war was long and disastrous. For the first time in his life, Caste suffered terrible defeats. The Loxatl were fierce and determined, and over several years they ground Castus's armies down until there was nothing left. Castus was so grieved by his failure that he would have happily died on the battlefield, but his generals tended his wounds and took him home. When Castus returned to the capital of Arzum, he was amazed. The poor, crumbling city he had left behind was gone, replaced by a forest of gleaming white towers and domes. A new advanced technology was visible everywhere, from fleets of sleek ships to soaring transitways. Antava's kin, the Tau, were now living alongside Castus's people in what looked like a kind of paradise. Antava rushed to find Castus and begged him to resume his role as governor, but the city officials and courtiers were horrified by the idea. Enamored as they were by their new, wealthy city, they refused to accept any ruler but Antava. Antava smiled sadly and said that if it was the will of the people, he would rule Arzum in the name of the Tau Empire. Castus was a broken man and spent his final years alone, shunned by those he once led as they embraced the glorious utopia they had built. Firstly, the parable reveals the name of a planet apparently dominated by the Loxatl, Propia. To our knowledge, this is the only mention of a planet being controlled by the reptilian race. Could Propia indeed be the home world of the Loxatl? Unfortunately, the exact locations of both Propia and indeed the Arzum system are still unknown. However, the fact that in the parable the inhabitants of Arzum turned from the light of the Emperor to embrace Tau-Va, the ideological concept of the greater good, this would most likely indicate that the Arzum system was found in the Damocles Gulf region of the Ultima Segmentum. The last breakthrough of the second sphere of expansion was the successful crossing of the Damocles Gulf, a mysterious region to the galactic east that had long thwarted all attempts by the Tau to pass through. Once on the other side of that roiling and unnavigable space phenomenon, the Tau swiftly established many colonies and outposts, soon making their first contact with the single largest power in the galaxy, the Imperium of mankind. After a long and subtle campaign, the Tau Empire had peacefully encroached upon many planets within the area of space known to the humans as the Timbra subsector of the segmentum Ultima. Here, the expanding Tau Empire found worlds claimed by dissident human populations who, in many cases, had effectively broken ties with the Imperium's sprawling galactic empire and were swiftly annexed by the Tau. Even those worlds still loyal to the occupants of the Golden Throne on Terra could find themselves persuaded to abandon ties with the distant and harsh rule of the Imperium through the subtle machinations of ambassadors of the Water Caste and the allure of a more central place in a seemingly more benevolent society. Unlike many of the galaxy's warring races, the Tau Empire does not see all alien life as an abomination to be destroyed. The Tau Va offers a better existence for all, and wherever possible the Ethereals will seek to draw cultures into the Empire peacefully. Each vassal race so absorbed brings its own unique skills, knowledge, and capabilities, not to mention fresh warriors to fight in the Tau's endless wars of expansion. This strategy began early in the Tau's first sphere of expansion, the Ethereals seeking to bring enlightenment to the alien cultures they encountered, however strange. It did not matter whether these newcomers were mired in barbarism, enslaved to crude superstitions, or simply unaware of the magnitude of the great destiny unfolding before them. The Ethereals said all should be welcomed into the emergent Tau Empire. The multi-armed Thraxians, the invertebrate Greet, the Nikazar, and many others, all were called upon to join the Tau Empire, to ally themselves through the appeal of mutual security, trade, and technology. The more primitive and docile aliens quickly bowed before the fair-speaking water caste emissaries, while others acquiesced only gradually. Ultimately, the results were the same, and within a short span of years the Tau's cultural ideology was dominant, with each race doing their part to aid the greater good. Not all alien peoples proved so accommodating. Those who refused cooperation outright were given harsh ultimatums. The full might of the Fire Caste was unleashed upon any aliens that did not comply. With the development of the ZFR Horizon Accelerator engine, allowing their ships to attain near-light speed, and the addition of Kroot auxiliaries following the war in the Place of Union, the second sphere expansion was even more dynamic than the first. But still, the Ethereal sought to assimilate any alien races they discovered through enticement rather than hostility. Having crossed the roiling space phenomenon that is the Damocles Gulf, is it indeed possible that the Tau discovered and attempted to incorporate the Loxatl into their empire, only to be thwarted by underestimating the cunning of the seemingly primitive reptiles? Having encountered and successfully incorporated the Vespid race into their empire as a vassal species, through trade in technological enhancements, and then finally the use of the Vespid communion helm, which some theorized to be a tool through which the race was subjugated, could the same have been attempted with the Loxatl? The Loxatl have no obvious means of creating the flechette blasters for which they are synonymous. Their physiology does not appear to allow for the digital dexterity required to create such technology, and their lack of spacefaring vessels, combined with an apparent lack of higher communication skills outside of their own species, would appear to make trading for such technology difficult. The Tau are known for developing weaponry specifically suited to the races they encounter, the Kroot rifle and the Vespid neutron blasters being two examples. While flechette blasters are more commonly employed by the Skitarii of the Adeptus Mechanicus, rather than the railguns and pulse rifles favoured by the Tau themselves, this shouldn't discount the possibility of the Tau providing these weapons to the Loxatl as part of a failed assimilation attempt. The flechette blasters employed by the Loxatl are aimed and fired by a cybernetic implant, analogous to a mind impulse device, and while again these are employed to great effect by the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Tau have a very similar technology, allowing the pilots of their battle suits to interface directly with the suit's sensors and targeting mechanisms. The final clue that may indicate that the Loxatl could have originated and been encountered by the Tau in the earlier days of their expansion is the races the Loxatl are often found travelling alongside. With no spacefaring technology of their own, the Loxatl are most commonly found travelling aboard vessels of the Nisakar and the Kroot, two races with long-standing and close ties to the Tau. This could be purely coincidental, due to the nomadic and, in the case of the Kroot, mercenary nature of these species. However, it could also indicate they share ties to a similar region within the Ultramar segmentum. Whatever the truth of the association between the Tau and the Loxatl, whether there was an attempt to incorporate the reptilian xenos which failed, and their societal structure prevented the usual retribution of the fire caste to those races that fail to embrace the greater good, it has not prevented the Tau from employing the services of Loxatl mercenaries, as was seen during the war on the water world of Phaedra against the Archon Confederates that started this entry into the Liber Xenologis. What might the future hold for this savage and cunning xenos race? Will the Imperium finally locate and destroy their home world and purge them from the galaxy, or have the Loxatl long ago abandoned their planet of origin, spreading across the galaxy seeking to sell their undeniable skills to the highest bidder, while sating their lust for bloodshed? Only time will tell. I hope you've enjoyed our journey together, and I've earned your subscription today, and I'll see you again in the near future, where there is only war.